Hello and welcome to KennyRoy.com. I'm Kenny Roy. This is the Ask Video Mail for the week of March 30th, 2015. Welcome to the site to new members and welcome back to the old members. The Ask Video Mail is your chance to get your question in character animation or performance answered in a video just like this one. But I need your question if I'm going to answer it right. Yes, so please send your questions to webmaster, getting a little tongue-tied, at KennyRoy.com. I go through all the questions I receive and I answer the ones I think will help the most people. It's my community service to you. There's no such thing as a stupid question, believe me. And it is the best way to get the most out of the site. Take advantage of that. Come on, guys. Man, if you are the superstitious type, if you cross fingers and toes for regular everyday things, I need you to cross everything you got. Cross them if you got them. I got huge business on the horizon. It would mean a huge change for me. I've been working on this for months. I've mentioned here and there in Ask Video Mails and other things, how close we are to a major change here at the studio, and we're on we are perched on the precipice of progress. That was a little bit too much of effort for that. Not a lot of payoff. No, but please, need your good vibes, guys. Need your big vibes, good vibes. A lot of good stuff for the industry if I can pull this deal off. So please help me make it happen. Any way you can. Chakras, lighting candles, crossing appendages, extra appendages. If you were born with maybe just a few extra, this is the time. This was why. So you can cross them all. So, all right, that's a little gross. I apologize to anyone who does have maybe 6 fingers or toes. Thank you. Let's just get to the question. Let's just move on. I'd like to move on now. Here we go. Great question. Man, people seem to really be caught up about gimbal lock. Like 1 out of 10 questions at least has something to do with gimbal lock. I decided to just create a gimbal. If you don't know what a gimbal is a contraption that has rings. Let me just show you what it is. This is a gimbal. Okay, here's my object, and it is in a gimbal. It is a child of the smallest ring in here. Okay? And this one is a child of this ring, and this one is a child of this ring. So this represents your rotation order. So when you are working with a controller, normally the orientation is X, Y, Z. And so here we have it. Here's the X rotation axis, here's the Y, and here's the Z. All right? X, Y, Z. Okay? And now imagining that these can only rotate on the one axis that they are oriented towards, you can get any configuration you want, can't you? Right? So if I want this thing, up here like this, kind of facing camera, then I would go like that, right? Now, why is this the way that it happens? Well, Maya needs a rotation order because in 3D space, actually just like in math and programming, there's an order to everything. In arithmetic, order of operations, right? Parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. Right? You have to do those in those order or everything falls apart. There's no such thing as doing it all at once. Okay? So even rotating something, Maya has to do it in an order. And the order that you do it in determines what axis is a parent or a child, basically, of the other in the gimbal. Okay? And it needs to do this because to rotate something, you have to do those operations And then at the end of it, the result of that will be translated into a world axis orientation. Okay? So let me show you a couple things. All right? Are there multiple gimbal orientations that will provide this exact same orientation? Okay? So the skinny side is up. It's kind of like trapezoidal, right? Skinny side up, open side facing to the left. Are there? Yes, there are. So watch. So if I rotate this 180 degrees on the x-axis, okay, and then spin it around 180 degrees on the y-axis, I'm doing it in the rotation order, okay, and then 180 degrees in the z-axis. There we go. Now, this has the same, and then that result is given out to Maya. It says like, okay, I've rotated in this order, and now the result is that in world space, the result is it has a orientation of x is 0, y is 0, z is 0. Now, what gimbal lock is when you move through a world axis orientation that can be described more simply, mathematically, by a completely different gimbal orientation. And normally it's on 90 or 180 degrees, but a completely different gimbal orientation than the orientation or the keyframe or whatever before it. And this happens especially often when you have things that are rotated past 90 or 180 degrees, and here's why. I'm going to reset transformations, and look, it looks like nothing happened, but actually it just went back to real 0. Let me show you what happens. Normally you can't screw much up by rotating the first axis in the rotation order. Oh, by the way, I just want to mention, my microphone, every like 5 recordings I make, the microphone goes nuts. And I try to catch it quickly, and if it happens, I will have to pause the recording, unplug it, plug it back in. I don't know what's going on. I think I've overloaded my USB. So if that happens, you're going to have like a couple seconds of like insanely loud like crackling, and I'll fix it. So I apologize for that in advance. What was I saying? Okay, so you can't really screw up too much normally by using the first axis in your rotation order. And that's why a good rigger knows that the most commonly used rotation axis should be the first one in the rotation order. Okay? So as long as this bone in this arm is oriented so that x is forward, x should be the first rotation, x, y, z. But if this joint is oriented forward, so y is that way, then the z-axis should be the first rotation. Because as you can see, it doesn't screw up the relationship between any of the gimbal axes below it. Now watch what happens if I grab the y and I rotate it 90 degrees. See how the z and the x are now lined up? Now look what happens if I rotate it 180 degrees. Now we're getting into I'm trying to do it mathematically. Now we're getting into the precarious position where the x rotation combined with a little bit of the z rotation gets us back to that original orientation, right? Okay. So as you can see, when things start rotating and your scene, and this exists in your scene, okay? This exists in your scene, but you just can't see it. You just can't see it because it is behind the scenes. It's an invisible object, basically, the gimbal is. It's an invisible object that is attached to all of your objects, and it drives the rotations, okay? But as you can see right now, you have very little difference between the z-axis and the x-axis. They're both doing the exact same thing. Now, normally when you cruise through an orientation, like, you're never going to really be, like when you're animating stuff, you're never really going to go exactly 90 degrees and then start rotating stuff. I mean, really, you're not. You're going to go through it, but every once in a while you do get what's called gimbal locked, where the orientation is such that the gimbal has decided to basically make it so that Z right here, Z is inaccessible, and only X is working. Sort of like cutting its losses and saying, okay, well, we're going to just try to make all of these axes, all of these orientations work in world space using what we've got. Okay? So if I rotate this object, it's actually kind of difficult to force it to happen. If I rotate it 90 degrees in Y, set a key right here, and then rotate it 180 degrees. Actually, let's give it a little bit more time. 180 degrees in Z, and then set a key, and then 180 degrees in X. Okay, and then so that is basically just a Y rotation of 90 right here. All right, do you see that? So it rotates 180, or rotates, sorry, 90 in Y, 180 in Z, 180 in X, and then goes back to 0 . You see that? It's not just because those two axes are fighting against each other. Those two axes are gimbal locked. Those two axes, X and Z, see how they have... Let's see if I can do this. Yeah, see, we're not going to get any results from those anymore. You see that? Those two axes, the X and the Z, are doing nothing anymore. All right? So, and why that is happening is here's why. Because I lined them up, and this one going 150 degrees this way, because I rotated it, right? So this is positive this way. This is positive that way. Well, it's not going to. We can't trust this because this is actually the result in world space. So forget what that looks like. The gimbal axis is actually. It's hard to describe now. I'm really getting it. I'm trying my best not to mix terms, but I rotated that gimbal, that axis, and so the Z is going 150 degrees this way, the X is going 150 degrees that way, and those two axes are doing nothing. And look at that. It's just crazy orientation. All right. 151, 90, 90, 90, 90. Okay. So I just basically locked those two axes together and basically unable to move it. So let me show you something. So if I go 90, actually, let me grab both of these. X and Z, if I go like 150, 150, okay, those were the real values. That was one of the keyframes in between the, what do you call it? That was one of the keyframes in between the values of where I had that one orientation and then they had the other orientation, and the X and Z were working together, okay? So at an orientation of 90, do you see how that wiggle is happening? That's because the Y is just off of 90. But look at all the action. I mean, I can go to negative 1,000, positive 4,000. I can go back and forth, and look at that. Is that really what the orientation is? No, it's not really. What is the actual orientation? Well, let me show you something. If Y is the most important axis, then if we change the rotation order to YXZ, like this, and then change X and Z, you see how they're unlocked now. Now we're actually getting some value. So, simply put, on XYZ orientation, which is normal, X should be the most important rotation axis. So how does this answer the question? Staying in gimbal mode means keeping an eye on. Let me reset this. Okay. Staying in gimbal mode means this. Means if I want an orientation, and some people do this, they rotate the gimbal, the X axis just on the X. Okay. Once you get, in fact, let me show it to you. So if I go to gimbal, now we have the gimbal axes, okay? And the funny thing is that, oh, I already changed the rotation order, which is funny. Notice how pardon me, sorry. Notice how the Y doesn't actually move. Those are the two gimbal axes, whereas the Z moves them both, and the X would just move the Z. No, it's just moving the Y. Wait, yeah, no, that's right. You see that? And so if you are fine with coming up with any orientation possible, having to deal with, see those two gimbal axes line up? If you're okay with that, then you'll never get gimbal lock ever. But that's really tough to figure out. So what I recommend is to zero your controls constantly when you're dealing with rotations, especially in the spine, like the torso, the cog, torso, upwards. Wrists as well are kind of problematic. But to zero your rotations and sort of rebuild your pose at major keyframes. And then when you get a little bit messed up, throw an Euler filter in, EULER, and that is found in the graph editor under curves right here, Euler filter. Now what does that do? That filters the gimbal rotations for a more pleasing or a smaller result in Euler XYZ orientation, basically the world space orientation. So going from here to here, let me do it on screen. Going from here to here, like in gimbal, might mean that you went past a 90 degree, which means 180 on one axis and then 90 again on another axis, just to go like a little bit, just a tiny little rotation. okay? That's what it might mean. But the Euler filter will say, well, I know what that is. I get that. But that's making in world space this crazy like thing happen. So let's try a different motion on the gimbal. Or let's just not try a different. Let's go with the gimbal rotation that even if it's a bigger change, produces a smaller change in Euler world orientation. So that's what I do. Blink, blink. I really didn't plan for this to be like the be-all, end-all of gimbal explanations. I wanted to get into it, but I don't know. Let me focus here. I just at the end of the day, the result is all that's important, and how you get that result is called workflow. If you have a really solid workflow where you're working in Gimbal, God bless you. I find it's not necessary at all. I'm not plagued with the gimbal lock the way that most people are, and I think it's because I'm zeroing rotations constantly and sort of almost doing an Euler filter as I work with my own stuff. Kind of. So the bottom line is that if your workflow is not to work with that right now, switching to working in only gimbal mode will be devastating to your workflow. You will slow so much. You will slow down awfully. And you might never even get back that speed ever, because it's a weird way to work. So all I can say is that your workflow is always the most important. So if you want to try it out, sure, of course. Experimentation I'm on board for that. But this is not a fix-all for gimbal lock, all right? Maybe try to do a little bit of like my method of being careful with your rotations in the first place, I would say. And also, changing the rotation order of controls to fit the scene is fine too. Normally, like for instance, the rotation order on the master control, or on the cog, is XYZ, because typically, we do a lot of this. But if you have a scene where there's not a lot of bending at all, and your character is like turning around and like talking to different people and doing just a lot of spinning, change the rotation order to YXZ. Because there's going to be very little of this, on the cog, right? Like almost never. So change your rotation order for that scene. Know why, envision the gimbal in your mind and know why you want that main axis to be the first in that order. And you might actually find some good results with that. So I hope this was helpful, and that you get a lot less problems with your rotations. That would be my hope. All right. So thanks for watching. That was a great question. Don't forget to send them to webmaster@kennyroy.com. Looking forward to seeing all you guys' questions. Send them in. Love to see them. It's been a pleasure. I'm Kenny Roy. As always, rock on.